The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at London Heathrow Airport as the royal convoy pulled up to the private terminal. King Charles III stepped out of his Bentley, adjusting his navy blue suit jacket against the crisp autumn air. Behind him, Queen Camilla emerged gracefully, her cream-colored coat perfectly pressed despite the early hour. The couple's faces showed a mixture of anticipation and solemnity as they prepared for what many considered one of the most significant diplomatic visits of Charles's reign. The journey to Vatican City had been planned for months, involving countless meetings between British diplomats and Vatican officials. Every detail had been scrutinized, from the timing of their arrival to the specific protocols that would govern their audience with Pope Francis. This was not merely a ceremonial visit but a carefully orchestrated diplomatic mission that would strengthen ties between the United Kingdom and the Holy See at a time when both institutions faced unprecedented challenges. As the royal couple boarded their aircraft, a modified Airbus A321neo of the RAF Snow 32 Squadron, the significance of their mission weighed heavily on their minds. Charles had waited decades for this moment, not just as king but as a man of deep faith who had long admired the Pope's commitment to environmental causes and social justice. The two leaders shared remarkably similar views on climate change, interfaith dialogue, and the responsibility of institutions to serve the marginalized. The flight to Rome provided Charles and Camilla with precious time to review their itinerary and reflect on the historical importance of their visit. No British monarch had visited the Vatican since Queen Elizabeth II meeting with Pope John XI in 1961, making this occasion a momentous step in Anglo-Vatican relations. The Queen Consort spent much of the flight studying briefing papers about Vatican protocol, determined to honor both her role and the traditions of the institution they were about to enter. Charles used the travel time to review his prepared remarks for the various ceremonies and meetings scheduled throughout their stay. His private secretary had worked closely with Vatican officials to ensure that every word would be appropriate and meaningful. The King's speech to the diplomatic corps would focus on shared values and common challenges facing the international community, while his private audience with the Pope would allow for more personal and substantive discussions about their mutual concerns. As their aircraft descended toward Rome's Ciampino Airport, the royal couple could see the ancient city spread out below them. The 7 hills of Rome were bathed in golden afternoon light, and somewhere among those historic streets lay Vatican City, the world's smallest sovereign state and the spiritual center of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. The sight filled both Charles and Camilla with a sense of reverence and responsibility. The Italian government had spared no effort in preparing for the royal visit. Security measures were unprecedented, with multiple agencies coordinating to ensure the safety of both the British monarchs and the Pope. The route from the airport to their accommodation had been thoroughly secured, and Vatican security had worked closely with British protection officers to develop comprehensive safety protocols. Upon landing, the royal couple were greeted by the British ambassador to Italy, Lord Llewellyn, and senior Vatican officials including Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State. The formal welcome ceremony was brief but dignified, reflecting the mutual respect between the institutions represented. Charles's fluent Italian, honed through years of study and practice, impressed the welcoming committee and set a warm tone for the visit ahead. The motorcade journey through Rome provided glimpses of the city's magnificent architecture and bustling street life. Romans lined the streets to catch a glimpse of the royal visitors, many waving small Union Jacks alongside Vatican flags. The spontaneous warmth of the reception touched both Charles and Camilla, who waved graciously from their vehicle while remaining mindful of security protocols. Their accommodation had been arranged at the British Embassy to the Holy See, an elegant building that had served as the center of Anglo-Vatican relations since diplomatic ties were restored in 1982. The embassy staff had worked tirelessly to ensure every detail of the royal couple's stay would be perfect, from the flowers in their private quarters to the security arrangements that would protect them throughout their visit. As evening fell over Rome, Charles and Camilla attended a small dinner hosted by the ambassador. The guest list included senior Vatican officials, representatives from the Italian government, and members of the British diplomatic community. The conversation flowed easily, touching on topics ranging from art and architecture to the challenges facing modern Europe. The Pope's absence from this initial gathering only heightened anticipation for their formal meeting the following day. Cardinal Parolin, known for his diplomatic skill and warm personality, proved to be an engaging dinner companion. He shared insights into the Pope's priorities and the Vatican's perspective on various international issues. The Cardinal's obvious respect for both the Pope and the British royal family helped establish a foundation of mutual understanding that would prove invaluable in the days ahead. During the evening, Charles had the opportunity to speak privately with several Vatican officials about his long-standing interest in interfaith dialogue. His work with various religious communities in Britain had earned him respect across denominational lines, and the Vatican officials were eager to learn from his experiences. These informal conversations laid important groundwork for more formal discussions that would follow. Camilla found herself particularly drawn to discussions about the Vatican's charitable work and its efforts to support refugees and displaced persons worldwide. Her own charitable interests align closely with many Vatican initiatives, and she was impressed by the scope and effectiveness of the Church's humanitarian efforts. These conversations would later influence her public remarks about the importance of international cooperation in addressing global challenges. The evening concluded with a brief tour of the embassy's private chapel, where both Charles and Camilla took time for personal reflection. The chapel, though modest in size, contained beautiful examples of religious art and provided a peaceful space for prayer and contemplation. The royal couple's guide, a senior embassy chaplain, spoke movingly about the role of faith in diplomatic service and the special significance of their upcoming audience with the Pope. As they retired to their quarters, both Charles and Camilla felt the weight of history and the importance of their mission. Tomorrow would bring their formal entry into Vatican City and their historic meeting with Pope Francis. The centuries-old protocols they would follow had been carefully preserved and adapted to reflect the unique nature of their visit. Every gesture, every word would be scrutinized and remembered, making their preparation all the more crucial. The king spent his final waking hours reviewing notes about the Pope's background and interests. Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Argentina, had lived a remarkable life before ascending to the papacy. His experiences working with the poor in Buenos Aires, his commitment to social justice, and his revolutionary approach to papal leadership had earned him admirers worldwide. Charles felt a deep kinship with the Pope's environmental advocacy and his calls for greater attention to climate change. Meanwhile, Camilla prepared for her own significant role in the visit. As Queen Consort, she would participate in several important ceremonies and would have the opportunity to meet with various Vatican officials and their spouses. Her natural warmth and diplomatic skills would be essential in strengthening the personal relationships that often prove crucial in international relations. The security briefing they had received earlier in the evening had outlined the extraordinary measures being taken to ensure their safety. The Vatican's Swiss Guard, with their colorful traditional uniforms and modern weapons training, would work alongside British protection officers and Italian security forces. The coordination required for such an operation was immense, involving multiple agencies and hundreds of personnel. As Rome settled into nighttime quiet, the royal couple could hear the distant sounds of the Eternal City continuing its ancient rhythms. Church bells marked the hours, reminding them of the spiritual significance of their location and mission. Tomorrow they would enter Vatican City not just as representatives of the British Crown but as pilgrims seeking to strengthen bonds between their nation and the Holy See. The historical significance of their visit could not be overstated. The relationship between Britain and the Vatican had been complex and sometimes difficult over the centuries, marked by periods of conflict and cooperation. The establishment of full diplomatic relations in 1982 had opened new possibilities for collaboration, and their visit represented the flowering of that relationship into something deeper and more meaningful. Charles's personal faith journey had been well documented over the years. As heir to the throne, he had often spoken about his role as future defender of the faith and his commitment to protecting all religious communities in Britain. His understanding of different faith traditions and his advocacy for interfaith dialogue had earned him respect far beyond the Anglican community. This background made him uniquely qualified to represent Britain in discussions with the Vatican about shared concerns and common goals. The Queen Consort's own spiritual journey had been more private but no less significant. Her marriage to Charles had brought new responsibilities and opportunities to serve, and she had embraced her role with grace and determination. Her presence at the Vatican would demonstrate the unity of the royal couple and their shared commitment to the values they represented. As they prepared for sleep in the quiet embassy, both Charles and Camilla understood that they stood on the threshold of a historic moment. Their actions over the next few days would be remembered for generations and would help shape the relationship between Britain and the Vatican for years to come. The weight of that responsibility was balanced by their confidence in the importance of their mission and their faith in the positive impact their visit could have on both institutions and the wider world. The morning would bring new challenges and opportunities as they prepared to cross the threshold into Vatican City and begin the formal ceremonies that would mark their historic visit. Every protocol had been carefully planned, every contingency considered, but the true success of their mission would depend on the personal connections they could forge and the mutual understanding they could build with their Vatican hosts. Their final thoughts before sleep were of the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment and the hopes they carried for what their visit might accomplish in strengthening the bonds between their nations and advancing the causes they both held dear. Dawn broke over Rome with a gentle golden light that seemed to bless the ancient city as it prepared for an extraordinary day. King Charles woke early, as was his custom, and spent time in quiet reflection before the formal activities began. The embassy chapel provided a peaceful sanctuary where he could gather his thoughts and prepare spiritually for the momentous meetings ahead. His prayers that morning focused not only on the success of the diplomatic mission but on the broader goals of peace and understanding that the visit represented. Queen Camilla began her day with careful attention to the protocols that would govern every aspect of their entry into Vatican City. Her lady-in-waiting had worked closely with Vatican ceremonial officials to ensure that her attire would be appropriate for each occasion. The traditional black dress with long sleeves and high neckline, accompanied by a black lace mantilla, represented centuries of diplomatic custom when meeting the Pope. Every detail had been considered, from the length of her gloves to the style of her shoes. The breakfast meeting with senior embassy staff provided final updates on security arrangements and last-minute protocol adjustments. The ambassador briefed them on the latest weather conditions, which promised a clear, crisp day perfect for the outdoor ceremonies planned at St. Peter's Square. Intelligence reports confirmed that all security preparations were complete and that Vatican officials were eagerly anticipating the royal arrival. At precisely 9 o'clock, the royal motorcade departed the British embassy for the short journey to Vatican City. The route had been carefully planned to showcase some of Rome's most beautiful architecture while maintaining maximum security. As they traveled along the Tiber River, Charles and Camilla could see a St. Peter's Dome rising majestically above the surrounding buildings, its imposing presence serving as a reminder of the spiritual and temporal power they were about to encounter. The approach to Vatican City through St. Anne's Gate marked a symbolic threshold between the secular world of Rome and the spiritual realm of the Holy See. Swiss guards in their distinctive Renaissance-era uniforms stood at attention as the royal convoy passed through the ancient portals. Their colorful striped costumes, designed by Michelangelo himself, seemed to bridge the centuries between the Renaissance and the present day. Inside Vatican City, the royal couple were struck by the immediate change in atmosphere. The bustling noise of Roman traffic gave way to a profound quiet broken only by the gentle splash of fountains and the distant sound of church bells. The carefully maintained gardens stretched out before them, providing a sense of peace and tranquility that seemed almost otherworldly in the heart of busy Rome. Their first formal ceremony took place in the courtyard of St. Damasus, where a guard of honor from the Swiss Guard stood ready to welcome them. The ceremonial inspection of the guard allowed Charles to demonstrate his military background and his respect for the traditions of Vatican security. Each guard stood motionless as the king passed, their halberds gleaming in the morning sun and their eyes fixed straight ahead with professional discipline. The courtyard itself was a masterpiece of Renaissance architecture, its elegant proportions and classical details providing a fitting backdrop for the historic ceremony. Vatican photographers discreetly captured every moment, ensuring that this unprecedented visit would be properly documented for posterity. The images would later be distributed worldwide, showing the world the dignity and mutual respect that characterized the meeting between these two ancient institutions. Cardinal Parolin, serving as the Pope's representative for the formal welcome, delivered remarks that emphasized the shared values and common concerns that had brought the royal couple to Vatican City. His words spoke of the responsibility that both the monarchy and the papacy bore for promoting peace, justice, and environmental stewardship in an increasingly challenging world. The cardinal's evident sincerity and warmth set a positive tone for all the ceremonies that would follow. King Charles's response demonstrated both his diplomatic skill and his deep personal commitment to the issues that had brought him to the Vatican. He spoke eloquently about the need for international cooperation in addressing climate change, the importance of interfaith dialogue in promoting understanding between communities, and the role that traditional institutions could play in providing moral leadership in uncertain times. His words resonated strongly with his Vatican audience and would later be quoted extensively in international media coverage. Following the formal welcome ceremony, the royal couple were escorted to the Apostolic Palace for their private audience with Pope Francis. The walk through the palace corridors provided glimpses of some of the world's most precious artistic treasures, from ancient frescoes to priceless sculptures that had been collected over centuries. Each room they passed told a story of papal history and the evolution of the Catholic Church's relationship with the wider world. The Swiss guards who escorted them maintained perfect formation despite the complex route through the palace's historic corridors. Their training in both ceremonial duties and modern security techniques was evident in every step they took. The combination of ancient traditions and contemporary security needs created a unique atmosphere that perfectly captured the essence of Vatican City as both a historic institution and a modern sovereign state. As they approached the papal apartments, the royal couple could feel the anticipation building among their escorts and the Vatican officials who would witness this historic meeting. Private audiences with the Pope were rare and significant events, carefully scheduled and meticulously planned to ensure their success. The fact that this meeting had been arranged at all spoke to the importance both sides placed on strengthening Anglo-Vatican relations. The final preparations in the antechamber allowed both Charles and Camilla to compose themselves before meeting one of the world's most influential religious leaders. Vatican protocol officers provided last-minute reminders about proper forms of address and the ceremonial procedures that would govern their audience. Every gesture had meaning in Vatican diplomatic tradition, and both sides were determined to honor these ancient customs while focusing on the substantive issues that had brought them together. Pope Francis's personal study, where the audience would take place, reflected his well-known preference for simplicity and accessibility. Unlike the ornate papal apartments used by his predecessors, Francis had chosen more modest accommodations that better reflected his commitment to humility and service. The room's simple furnishings and religious art created an atmosphere conducive to serious discussion and genuine dialogue. When the ornate doors finally opened and they were announced into the papal presence, King Charles and Queen Camilla entered one of the most significant moments of their reign. Pope Francis rose to greet them with a warm smile that immediately put them at ease. Despite the formal protocols that governed such meetings, his natural warmth and evident pleasure at receiving them created an atmosphere of genuine welcome and mutual respect. The Pope's greeting in fluent English demonstrated his consideration for his British guests and his desire to communicate directly rather than through interpreters. His opening words emphasized the historic nature of their visit and his hope that their discussions would lead to greater cooperation between their institutions. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, setting the stage for the substantive conversations that would follow. After the formal exchange of gifts, including a specially commissioned piece of British silver for the Pope and a beautiful edition of papal writings for the King, the three leaders settled into comfortable chairs arranged around a small table. The informal seating arrangement encouraged the kind of open dialogue that both sides hoped would characterize their meeting. Vatican aides discreetly withdrew, leaving the three principals free to speak candidly about the issues that concerned them most. The conversation began with climate change, a topic on which both Charles and Francis had been outspoken advocates for years. The King's lifelong commitment to environmental protection found a ready audience in the Pope, who had made care for creation a central theme of his papacy. Their discussion ranged from specific policy initiatives to the broader philosophical questions about humanity's relationship with the natural world. Francis shared his experiences visiting communities affected by climate change around the world, from small island nations threatened by rising sea levels to indigenous communities whose traditional ways of life were being disrupted by environmental degradation. His first-hand accounts of these encounters brought a human dimension to the statistical data about climate change that both leaders knew so well. The Pope's passion for environmental justice was evident in every word he spoke. King Charles reciprocated by describing his own efforts to promote sustainable agriculture and renewable energy through his various charitable foundations. The Duchy of Cornwall's conversion to organic farming methods and his advocacy for traditional building techniques that worked in harmony with the environment provided concrete examples of the principles they both espoused. Their shared commitment to practical action as well as moral leadership created an immediate bond between the two men. The discussion moved naturally to questions of social justice and the responsibility of institutions to serve the most vulnerable members of society. Both men had spent decades advocating for the poor and marginalized, though from very different perspectives and platforms. The Pope's work in the slums of Buenos Aires and his continued focus on economic inequality complemented Charles's efforts to address urban poverty and social exclusion in Britain. Queen Camilla contributed her own insights drawn from her extensive charitable work, particularly her advocacy for victims of domestic violence and her support for literacy programs. Her practical experience working directly with vulnerable communities provided a different but complementary perspective to the more theoretical discussions about institutional responsibility. The Pope was clearly impressed by her knowledge and commitment to these issues. As their conversation continued, it became clear that despite their different backgrounds and roles, the three leaders shared a remarkably similar worldview. All believed strongly in the dignity of every human person and the responsibility of those in positions of privilege to serve those less fortunate. This common foundation made their discussions both productive and deeply meaningful. The Pope spoke movingly about his vision for a more inclusive and compassionate Catholic Church, one that focused on mercy rather than judgment and reached out especially to those who had been marginalized or excluded. His reform efforts within the Church paralleled Charles's own work to modernize the monarchy while preserving its essential traditions and values. Both men understood the challenges of leading ancient institutions through periods of rapid social change. Their discussion of interfaith relations revealed another area of strong agreement between the two leaders. The Pope's commitment to dialogue with other Christian denominations and non-Christian faiths aligned perfectly with Charles's long-standing advocacy for religious tolerance and understanding. Both men had worked extensively with leaders from other faith traditions and understood the importance of such relationships in promoting global peace and cooperation. The conversation touched on specific examples of successful interfaith cooperation, from joint charitable initiatives to shared advocacy on issues like religious freedom and the protection of minority communities. These concrete examples provided hope that formal religious differences need not prevent meaningful collaboration on shared moral concerns. The potential for expanded cooperation between Anglican and Catholic institutions was clearly a priority for both leaders. As their private audience continued, the depth of mutual respect and understanding between King Charles and Pope Francis became increasingly evident. Their shared commitment to servant leadership and their similar approaches to the challenges facing their respective institutions created a foundation for partnership that extended far beyond mere diplomatic courtesy. The personal chemistry between the two men suggested that their relationship could become genuinely transformational for both the monarchy and the papacy. #The Royal Couple's Vatican Journey. Document 3. The private audience with Pope Francis extended well beyond its scheduled duration, a clear sign of the genuine connection that had developed between the three leaders. Their conversation had moved from formal diplomatic topics to deeply personal discussions about faith, leadership, and the challenges of serving in positions of enormous responsibility. As the morning progressed into early afternoon, it became clear that this was becoming much more than a ceremonial visit. Pope Francis spoke candidly about his own journey to the papacy, describing the shock and humility he felt when chosen by his fellow cardinals to lead the Catholic Church. His experiences as an archbishop in Argentina during periods of political turmoil had shaped his understanding of the Church's role in protecting human rights and advocating for social justice. The king listened intently, recognizing parallels with his own long preparation for the throne and his evolving understanding of monarchical duty. The Pope's decision to take the name Francis, after Saint Francis of Assisi, had been motivated by the saint's commitment to poverty, peace, and care for creation. This choice reflected his own priorities as Pope and resonated strongly with Charles's environmental advocacy. The two men discovered that they had both been influenced by the same writings of Saint Francis, particularly his Canticle of the Creatures, which praised God through the natural world. Queen Camilla found herself deeply moved by the Pope's stories about his pastoral work among the poor in Buenos Aires. His descriptions of celebrating Mass in shantytown chapels and his ministry to families struggling with poverty and violence revealed the experiences that had shaped his approach to papal leadership. Her own charitable work, while conducted in very different circumstances, shared the same fundamental commitment to serving those most in need of support and advocacy. The conversation turned to the unique challenges of leading ancient institutions in the modern world. Both the monarchy and the papacy faced questions about their relevance and legitimacy from critics who viewed them as outdated remnants of earlier eras. The Pope and King found common ground in their belief that traditional institutions could and must evolve while maintaining their core spiritual and moral purposes. Francis shared his frustrations with some elements within the Catholic Church who resisted his reform efforts, particularly his emphasis on mercy over judgment and his calls for greater inclusion of marginalized groups. Charles understood these challenges intimately, having faced similar resistance to his own efforts to modernize the monarchy while preserving its constitutional role and ceremonial dignity. Both men had learned the importance of patient persistence in the face of institutional inertia. Their discussion revealed a shared understanding of the loneliness that often accompanies positions of ultimate responsibility. While surrounded by advisors and supporters, both men spoke honestly about the isolation that comes with making decisions that affect millions of people. This personal vulnerability created a bond between them that went far beyond their official roles and suggested the possibility of genuine friendship. The Pope expressed his admiration for the British system of constitutional monarchy, which he saw as providing stability and continuity while allowing for democratic governance. Charles reciprocated with praise for the Pope's moral leadership on global issues, particularly his willingness to speak out on controversial topics like economic inequality and environmental protection. Their mutual respect was evident in every exchange. As their private time together drew to a close, Pope Francis presented King Charles with a special gift, a manuscript copy of one of his own encyclicals on care for the environment, personally inscribed with a message of friendship and shared commitment to protecting God's creation. The king was visibly touched by this gesture, understanding both its personal significance and its symbolic importance for future Anglo-Vatican relations. The formal exchange of gifts that followed was conducted according to centuries-old protocols, but the warmth between the participants gave these traditional ceremonies new meaning. Charles presented the Pope with a collection of rare books on interfaith dialogue from the Royal Library, along with a beautiful piece of contemporary British religious art that would have a place of honor in the papal apartments. Queen Camilla's gift to the Pope was particularly meaningful, a handcrafted altar cloth created by women in a British charity program that supported survivors of domestic violence. The Pope was moved by both the beauty of the work and the story behind its creation, seeing it as a perfect example of how traditional crafts could be used to support vulnerable communities while creating something beautiful for worship. Following their extended private audience, the royal couple were invited to participate in the Pope's weekly general audience in St. Peter's Square. This public ceremony would give thousands of pilgrims and visitors the opportunity to see the historic meeting between the British monarchs and the Holy Father. The significance of this invitation was not lost on Vatican observers, as private papal guests were rarely included in such public ceremonies. The procession from the Apostolic Palace to St. Peter's Square provided the royal couple with their first close-up view of the Vatican's magnificent architecture and art collections. Swiss guards lined their route, their colorful uniforms providing a striking contrast to the ancient marble corridors through which they passed. The Pope walked alongside them, pointing out particular treasures and sharing stories about their historical significance. The approach to St. Peter's Square revealed one of the world's most impressive architectural spaces, designed by Bernini to embrace visitors in the loving arms of the church. The elliptical colonnades and the towering Egyptian obelisk at the center created a sense of grandeur that had awed pilgrims for centuries. Today, thousands of people filled the square, their excited chatter creating a buzz of anticipation as news of the royal presence spread through the crowd. The special platform constructed for the papal audience provided perfect views of both the crowd and the magnificent facade of St. Peter's Basilica. King Charles and Queen Camilla took their designated seats with a mixture of humility and wonder, fully aware that they were participating in a ceremony that connected them with centuries of papal tradition and Catholic devotion. Pope Francis began his address to the crowd in his usual warm and informal style, switching easily between Italian, Spanish, and English to ensure that all visitors could understand his message. His references to the royal visit emphasized themes of unity, friendship, and shared commitment to serving humanity. The crowd's enthusiastic response made clear their appreciation for both the papal message and the historic nature of the occasion. The Pope's decision to invite King Charles to address the crowd was unprecedented, reflecting the extraordinary nature of their developing relationship. The king's brief remarks focused on the shared values that united people of goodwill regardless of their specific religious traditions. His words about the importance of caring for creation and serving the vulnerable resonated powerfully with the diverse international audience. Queen Camilla's presence on the papal platform also carried deep symbolic significance. As a divorced woman who had married into the Anglican royal family, her inclusion in such a sacred Catholic ceremony demonstrated the Pope's commitment to inclusion and his recognition of the complex realities of modern family life. Vatican observers noted this as another example of Francis's pastoral approach to traditional doctrinal questions. The general audience concluded with the Pope's traditional blessing of religious articles and his personal greetings to special guests. The royal couple were moved by the warmth of their reception from the crowd, many of whom held British flags alongside Vatican banners. The spontaneous singing of God Save the King by British pilgrims in the crowd created an emotional moment that brought tears to Camilla's eyes. Following the public ceremony, the Pope invited Charles and Camilla for a private tour of St. Peter's Basilica, one of Christianity's holiest sites. This extraordinary privilege was rarely extended to visiting dignitaries, making it another sign of the special relationship that had developed between the three leaders. The basilica after hours, with only minimal lighting and no crowds, provided an atmosphere of profound reverence and spiritual reflection. Pope Francis served as their personal guide, sharing stories about the basilica's construction, its artistic treasures, and its spiritual significance for Catholics worldwide. His obvious love for this sacred space was evident in every word he spoke. The king and queen listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated their genuine interest in understanding the traditions and beliefs that the basilica represented. The tour included visits to some of the basilica's most precious artistic treasures, including Michelangelo's Pietà and the magnificent Baldachin by Bernini that stood over the high altar. The Pope's explanations of these works revealed not only their artistic significance but also their theological meaning and their role in Catholic worship and devotion. Standing before the tomb of St. Peter, the fisherman who became the first pope, all three visitors felt the weight of history and the continuity of faith that connected them with countless generations of believers. The Pope offered prayers for peace and understanding between all Christian communities, while Charles and Camilla stood in respectful silence, honoring both the sacred space and the faith traditions it represented. Their visit to the Vatican crypts provided an even more intimate encounter with papal history. Walking among the tombs of past popes, including recent pontiffs like John XI and John Paul II, the royal couple gained a deeper appreciation for the burden of papal office and the legacy of spiritual leadership that Francis had inherited. The crypt's simple beauty and profound silence created an atmosphere conducive to prayer and reflection. As evening approached, the Pope invited Charles and Camilla to join him for a simple dinner in his private apartments. This informal meal, prepared by the Pope's personal staff according to his preferences for simple, traditional food, provided an opportunity for continued conversation in a relaxed setting. The Pope's insistence on serving his guests personally demonstrated the humility that had characterized his entire papacy. The dinner conversation ranged widely, from their shared concerns about global conflicts to lighter topics like their mutual love of literature and music. The Pope's extensive reading in theology and philosophy complemented Charles's broad intellectual interests, while Camilla's passion for promoting literacy found a sympathetic audience in the Pope's advocacy for education as a tool for social advancement. Throughout the evening, the three leaders continued to discover new areas of common ground and mutual interest. Their conversation about the role of women in religious institutions was particularly notable, with the Pope expressing his admiration for Camilla's charitable work and his hope for greater female participation in church leadership. These discussions suggested possibilities for future collaboration on issues of gender equality and women's empowerment. As the dinner concluded, all three participants recognized that something extraordinary had occurred during their time together. What had begun as a formal diplomatic visit had evolved into the foundation for a genuine partnership based on shared values and mutual respect. The personal bonds formed during this visit would provide a strong foundation for future cooperation between the British Crown and the Holy See. The Pope's invitation for Charles and Camilla to visit him again, perhaps in a more private setting away from the formalities of state visits, was both unexpected and deeply meaningful. Such personal relationships between world leaders often prove more valuable than formal diplomatic agreements in addressing global challenges and promoting international cooperation. The final day of the royal visit dawned with a sense of both accomplishment and reluctant farewell. King Charles and Queen Camilla had experienced something far beyond their expectations during their time in Vatican City. What had begun as a carefully orchestrated diplomatic mission had transformed into a deeply personal encounter that would influence both their understanding of their own roles and their approach to future international relations. The morning began with a private mass celebrated by Pope Francis in his personal chapel, an intimate space that reflected his preference for simplicity and authentic worship over elaborate ceremony. The invitation to participate in this most personal aspect of the Pope's daily routine was unprecedented for non-Catholic visitors and demonstrated the extraordinary level of trust and friendship that had developed between the three leaders. The chapel itself was modest in size but rich in spiritual atmosphere. Ancient icons and simple religious art created an environment conducive to prayer and reflection. The Pope's celebration of Mass was marked by the same warmth and accessibility that characterized all his interactions, making even non-Catholic participants feel welcomed and included in this sacred ceremony. King Charles and Queen Camilla participated respectfully in the portions of the service appropriate for Anglican visitors, while observing the specifically Catholic elements with reverent attention. Their presence at this most intimate papal ceremony sent a powerful message about the possibility of unity and cooperation between different Christian traditions, even while maintaining distinct theological identities. Following the Mass, the Pope shared breakfast with his royal guests in his simple dining room, continuing conversations that had begun during their formal meetings but now carried the relaxed intimacy of friends sharing a meal. The Pope's personal cook had prepared traditional Roman pastries and coffee, creating a homey atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the grandeur of most papal occasions. Their breakfast conversation touched on deeply personal topics, including the challenges of maintaining family relationships while serving in positions of enormous public responsibility. The Pope spoke movingly about his decision to live simply and his efforts to remain connected to ordinary people despite the isolation that his office could impose. Charles and Camilla shared their own struggles with balancing public duty and private life. The discussion of their children and grandchildren revealed another dimension of their shared humanity. The Pope's obvious affection for young people and his concern for the world they would inherit resonated strongly with the royal couple's own worries about future generations. Their shared commitment to leaving a better world for their successors had been a constant theme throughout their visit. After breakfast, the Pope personally escorted Charles and Camilla to the Vatican museums for a private tour of some of the world's greatest artistic treasures. This extraordinary privilege allowed them to experience masterpieces of Renaissance art without the crowds and time pressures that typically constrain such visits. The Pope's obvious love for art and his deep knowledge of the collections made him an exceptional guide. Their tour began in the Sistine Chapel, where they stood alone beneath Michelangelo's magnificent ceiling frescoes. The Pope's explanations of the theological themes woven throughout the artwork revealed layers of meaning that enhanced their appreciation of both the artistic achievement and its spiritual significance. The silence and beauty of the space created moments of profound reflection for all three visitors. The Pope's comments on Michelangelo's Last Judgment were particularly moving, as he connected the artist's vision of divine mercy and justice with contemporary challenges facing humanity. His interpretation of the masterpiece emphasized themes of redemption and hope that had characterized his entire papacy and resonated strongly with his royal guests' own understanding of their responsibilities as leaders. Moving through the papal apartments, they encountered room after room of artistic treasures, from ancient Roman sculptures to Renaissance paintings by the greatest masters. The Pope's stories about how these works had come to the Vatican and their role in papal history brought the collections to life in ways that no guidebook could match. His obvious reverence for both the artistic achievement and the spiritual themes they represented was infectious. In the Raphael rooms, the Pope paused before the Artists' School of Athens, using the masterpiece to discuss the relationship between faith and reason that had been central to Catholic intellectual tradition. His sophisticated understanding of philosophy and theology impressed his guests and provided insights into his own approach to papal teaching and leadership. Their private tour concluded in the Vatican Library, one of the world's most important repositories of ancient manuscripts and rare books. The Pope's personal interest in literature and learning was evident as he shared some of the library's greatest treasures, including illuminated manuscripts that had preserved classical and Christian texts through centuries of political upheaval and social change. The afternoon brought the formal conclusion of the royal visit, with a final ceremony in the courtyard of St. Damasus where it had all begun. The Swiss Guard again formed a honor guard as King Charles and Queen Camilla prepared to take their leave of Vatican City. The ceremony was necessarily brief, but its dignity and warmth reflected the success of the entire visit. Cardinal Parolin delivered farewell remarks on behalf of the Vatican, emphasizing the historic nature of the visit and expressing hope that the relationships forged during these days would bear fruit in years to come. His words carried genuine emotion as he thanked the royal couple for their openness and their commitment to the shared values that had made their visit so meaningful. King Charles's response demonstrated the diplomatic skills that had made him such an effective representative of Britain throughout his decades of public service. His words expressed genuine gratitude for the extraordinary hospitality they had received while also outlining specific areas where future cooperation between Britain and the Vatican could advance their common goals. The King's announcement of a new charitable initiative that would bring together British and Vatican organizations to address climate change and poverty was the concrete result of their discussions over the previous days. This partnership would provide a practical framework for translating their shared concerns into meaningful action that could benefit vulnerable communities worldwide. Queen Camilla's brief remarks focused on the personal impact of their visit and her commitment to continuing the dialogue with Vatican officials about issues affecting women and families. Her promise to host Vatican representatives in Britain for further discussions about domestic violence prevention and support for survivors was received with particular enthusiasm by her Vatican audience. The final exchange of gifts included personal letters between the Pope and the royal couple that would remain private but clearly carried deep emotional significance for all three participants. The Pope's blessing of a small religious medal for each of his guests provided them with personal mementos of their time together that they would treasure for the rest of their lives. As the royal motorcade prepared to depart Vatican City, Pope Francis made the unprecedented decision to personally escort his guests to St. Anne's Gate. This extraordinary gesture, never before extended to visiting heads of state, demonstrated the unique relationship that had developed during their visit and the Pope's desire to honor his new friends with every possible mark of respect. The Pope's final words to Charles and Camilla were delivered privately, but their emotional impact was evident in the expressions on all three faces. These personal farewells, conducted away from the cameras and crowds, allowed for genuine expressions of friendship and mutual admiration that had grown throughout their time together. The departure from Vatican City marked not an ending but a beginning for the relationship between these remarkable leaders. Their shared commitment to serving humanity and their genuine personal affection for each other had created possibilities for cooperation that extended far beyond traditional diplomatic protocols. The journey back through Rome to Ciampino Airport provided Charles and Camilla with time to reflect on the extraordinary experiences of their Vatican visit. The crowds that lined their route seemed even more enthusiastic than those that had welcomed them, perhaps sensing that something significant had occurred during their stay in the Holy City. At the airport, the formal departure ceremony was attended by the same Vatican and Italian officials who had welcomed them, but the atmosphere now carried the warmth of friendship rather than the careful courtesy of first meetings. Cardinal Parolin's farewell address spoke eloquently about the bonds that had been forged and the cooperation that would follow. The flight back to London provided Charles and Camilla with their first opportunity to discuss privately the full significance of their Vatican experience. Both recognized that they had participated in something that would be remembered as a turning point in Anglo-Vatican relations and a model for how traditional institutions could work together in addressing modern challenges. Their conversations with Pope Francis had provided insights into leadership and service that would influence their approach to their royal duties for years to come. The Pope's example of humble service and his commitment to the marginalized had reinforced their own understanding of the monarchy's responsibility to serve all people, regardless of their circumstances or beliefs. The practical outcomes of their visit would unfold over the months and years ahead, but the personal bonds forged during their time in Vatican City were already transforming the relationship between Britain and the Holy See. The regular correspondence that would develop between the Pope and the royal couple would provide a channel for continuing dialogue on issues of mutual concern. As their aircraft approached British airspace, both Charles and Camilla felt a deep sense of gratitude for the extraordinary privilege they had experienced. Their encounter with Pope Francis had not only advanced important diplomatic and charitable goals but had also enriched their own spiritual and personal lives in ways they were still discovering. The media coverage of their visit had been overwhelmingly positive, with commentators worldwide recognizing the historic significance of the meetings and the genuine warmth that had characterized all the interactions between the British and Vatican delegations. Editorial writers praised both sides for demonstrating how religious and cultural differences need not prevent meaningful cooperation on shared concerns. The return to royal duties in Britain carried new energy and purpose, informed by the insights and inspiration they had gained during their Vatican sojourn. The charitable initiatives that would emerge from their conversations with the Pope promised to make tangible differences in the lives of people around the world while strengthening the bonds between British and Catholic institutions. Most importantly, the personal transformation experienced by both Charles and Camilla during their Vatican visit would influence their approach to monarchy for the remainder of their reign. Their encounter with Pope Francis had provided a powerful example of how traditional institutions could maintain their essential character while adapting to serve contemporary needs and challenges. The royal couple's Vatican journey had concluded, but its influence on their lives and work was just beginning. The seeds planted during their remarkable meetings with Pope Francis would grow into lasting partnerships and continuing friendship that would benefit not only their respective institutions but the countless people they served around the world. Their extraordinary visit to Vatican City had demonstrated the continuing relevance and vital importance of moral leadership in an increasingly complex and challenging world.